Hey everyone, welcome back. Today we're diving deep into Chris Brown's 11th studio album, 11.10.
Ooh, exciting.
Yeah, I think it'll be interesting. You've probably seen the headlines, but we're going beyond all that to explore its creation.
Right.
Like how it came together, the themes, how it was received. We've got album reviews, articles about the 11.11 tour, and even award nomination info to help us unpack all of this.
Wow, sounds like you guys did your research.
We try to. This isn't just about music, though. It's a glimpse into Brown's evolution as an artist.
I mean, it's his 11th album, so.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And yeah, we're going to touch on those controversies that still follow him.
Can't really talk about Chris Brown without that, can we?
Unfortunately not.
So, right off the bat, the title itself, 11.11, kind of sparks curiosity.
Yeah, I was wondering about that.
Of course, it's Brown's 11th studio album, but there's more to it than that.
Oh.
The album art features 4 images of Chris Brown, like arranged to form 11.11.
Oh. And get this, the colors in those images actually align with the colors of body chakras.
Really?
Yeah. For those who don't know, chakras are energy centers in the body, according to some, spiritual traditions.
Ah, interesting.
This connection to numerology and spirituality adds a layer of intrigue, don't you think?
Absolutely. Makes you think about the intention behind all that imagery. And speaking of intriguing choices, I gotta admit, I was a little surprised to see this was a double album, 11 tracks on each side,
Right.
originally totaling 22. And then the deluxe edition added another 13. That's 35 tracks total.
That is a lot of music.
Didn't Brown say he was moving away from those super long albums?
He did. He even specifically said he was done with albums that had 20 to 40 songs.
And here we are.
But here we are with a 35-track project.
It really challenges the conventional idea of what an album should be in today's music.
Yeah.
Is it a bold statement or a case of quantity over quality? That's something that's come up in a lot of the reviews.
Definitely a question worth exploring.
For sure. But let's talk about the music itself. What really struck me was the sheer diversity of styles.
Yeah, it's pretty all over the place.
You've got classic R&B, some catchy pop tunes, those Afrobeats vibes we mentioned earlier, and even some dancehall influences. It's kind of all over the place.
That's Chris Brown.
But it somehow works.
That does.
Actually, can we play a snippet of Sensational for everyone? That song really showcases that Afrobeats influence.
Oh, yeah. Good choice.
See what I mean? That beat is infectious. And lyrically, the album covers a lot of ground too, right? There's like lighthearted content alongside moments where Brown gets into some heavier emotions.
Yeah, like anxiety and regret. You really get a sense of his vulnerability.
It's almost like he's inviting us into these different aspects of his life.
Right. You're right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, and critics have picked up on that. They've said 11.11 feels more romantic than some of his previous work.
Interesting. Like he's matured or something.
Yeah. It does suggest a level of maturity and introspection that maybe wasn't as prominent before. It's complex, just like Chris Brown himself.
Wouldn't you say?
For sure.
And speaking of complex, let's move on to the 11.11 tour. This thing was huge. It spanned North America, South Africa, and Brazil. The set list was a mix of hits from his entire career.
Wow, talk about a career retrospective.
I know, right? And it was cleverly structured around the 4 elements: fire, water, air, and earth. That's pretty cool, right?
Super creative.
Talk about a spectacle. The visuals must have been amazing.
Oh, they were. Sold-out shows, record-breaking attendance at Johannesburg.
Wow.
They even started calling the South Africa and Brazil shows the Breezy Bowl because they were held in massive stadiums. This tour was a global phenomenon, no doubt.
Absolutely. But as with, a lot of Brown's career, there was this shadow of controversy.
Yeah, unfortunately.
The protests in South Africa were hard to ignore.
Right.
This group, Women for Change, actively campaigned against his performances.
I remember reading about that.
They even tried to block his visa.
Yeah, because of his past domestic violence charges.
Yeah.
It brings up a really tough question. Can we, or should we, separate the art from the artist?
It's a debate that has no easy answers.
It really doesn't.
Brown himself addressed the protests, acknowledging the pain he'd caused while also talking about the economic benefits his concerts would bring to Johannesburg.
Right, and there were a lot of them. He even mentioned a figure of our 900 million.
Exactly. So it sparked all this discussion about accountability, forgiveness, and the complexities of supporting an artist with a troubled past.
A difficult conversation to have.
But a necessary one for sure.
Definitely. And it's interesting that all of this happened while 11.11 was getting a ton of critical acclaim.
It did.
Many reviewers praised his vocals, his growth as an artist.
Some even called it his best album in years.
Yeah, It's almost like there were these two parallel narratives happening at the same time.
That's what makes this so fascinating. Despite the controversy, the album really resonated with a lot of people, and the award nominations definitely speak for themselves.
They do.
11.11 landed on multiple Best R&B Albums of 2023 lists, and the deluxe version even made it onto the 2024 list, Grammy Awards, Billboard Music Awards, Beat Awards. He even won a Billboard Music Award for Top R&B Album.
That's huge.
It's a testament to his talent and the impact of his music.
It really is.
So just to recap, we've got this album that's like steeped in numerological symbolism, packed with all these different musical styles, and it showcases an artist at a crossroads in his career.
Yeah.
The tour was a global success, but, those past actions, that shadow, it still looms large. It's a lot to digest, wouldn't you say?
It is, and there's so much more to unpack here, but let's pause for a second. What are your initial thoughts on all of this? Anything that stands out to you about the album or the tour?
What's really striking me about all this is
What's that?
how 11.11 kind of mirrors the whole music industry,
What do you mean?
Like, you've got this amazing creative output on the one hand, right? But then it's all tangled up with these super complicated social issues.
Ooh, I see. It's like a microcosm of this bigger picture.
Yeah, it's that constant push and pull, isn't it?
Exactly.
Wanting to appreciate the music while also recognizing, the impact of the artist's actions.
It's tough.
It's especially relevant with someone like Chris Brown, where, the talent is undeniable.
Oh, absolutely.
But his past is always going to be part of the conversation.
It is. And that tension, it was so palpable in South Africa.
It was.
On one hand, you have all these people who were, ecstatic about this massive concert.
Right.
Remember, it brought an estimated R900 million into Johannesburg's economy.
Yeah, that's a big deal.
But then you had those protests from Women for Change, really powerful protests.
Hard to ignore that.
It became this, flashpoint in the whole debate.
It did. It even went beyond just the fans, though, right?
It did.
Some pretty prominent people in South Africa weighed in on the whole thing.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Mama Gethy Faken.
Who's she?
She's a really well-known academic and public figure in South Africa.
Oh.
She actually attended the concert, despite all the controversy surrounding it.
Wow, really?
She, acknowledged the organization's, mission, but she argued that just focusing on legal outcomes might not be as effective as, these bigger societal campaigns to address the root causes of the violence.
Yeah. It's a different way of looking at it, for sure.
It is. It's a very nuanced perspective on a really complex issue.
Mm-hmm.
And it got people talking, that's for sure.
It's interesting that she brings up the idea of effectiveness, though. What do you think? Is boycotting an artist's work an effective way to promote change? Or does it just shut down these important conversations we should be having?
That's a great question. And honestly, I don't think there's one simple answer. I really think it's something each person has to grapple with, individually.
Yeah, that's fair.
But, what we can say is that boycotting does bring attention to the issue,
Right.
And it forces people to actually confront their own values and where they stand.
That's true. It's like you can't just avoid it anymore. And maybe that discomfort, that's part of the process, Maybe these aren't issues that are meant to be easily solved.
Maybe not. And what about the music itself,
Yeah, right.
It seems like the way people responded to 11.11 also kind of reflects these complexities.
Oh, totally.
Some critics loved that the album was so long. Others felt completely overwhelmed by it.
Mm-hmm.
Some praised Brown's, evolution as an artist.
Right.
While others just couldn't get past his actions, It highlights how subjective art can be. Right?
It really does.
And how it can be interpreted in so many different ways.
Absolutely. I was reading this one review that described the album as a journey.
Oh, interesting.
What do you think they meant by that? Do you see 11.11 as some kind of journey for Chris Brown?
That's a good question.
Musically or personally?
I think there's definitely a sense of progression and exploration in the album, that's for sure.
Okay.
Musically, he experiments with a bunch of different sounds and styles, which you could totally see as a journey of creative growth, right?
I could see that.
And lyrically, there's this mix of, fun party anthems, alongside some really introspective tracks that kind of hint at his personal struggles.
And growth.
You could argue that reflects a journey of self-discovery and reflection.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So yeah, I think there's a journey in there for sure.
It sounds like he's kind of inviting us along for the ride.
It is.
Even if it's a bumpy one, right?
Even if it is. Do you think that's intentional, though?
It's hard to say.
It is, but I do think it's likely. you know.
How so?
I mean, artists often use their work to process their own experiences, right?
Yeah.
Their emotions and those complexities, they can totally come through in the music.
Whether they mean to or not.
Whether they mean to or not. And with someone like Chris Brown, who's always in the public eye,
Constantly.
there's even more scrutiny on his personal life and how it intersects with his art.
For sure.
So it makes you wonder, how much of that personal stuff ends up in the creative process. Like, did all those controversies, the protests, all that intense media attention, did any of that influence the music on 11.11?
I don't know. That's a good question.
It's tough to say. I mean, remember, art is never created in a vacuum, right?
True.
It's always influenced by the artist's experiences, their environment.
The world around them.
The world around them, exactly.
Yeah.
The social and political climate.
It all plays a role.
Everything plays a role. And in Brown's case, you just can't ignore those external factors,
No, you can't.
Whether they directly, shaped specific lyrics or melodies, that's up for debate.
Yeah, I guess so.
But they definitely contribute to the overall context in which we experience the album.
That's true. I hadn't thought of it like that before, but it makes sense. We can't really separate the art from the artist or the artist from their surroundings.
Right.
It all just feeds into that final product and how we interpret it.
It does. And that's what makes all of this so compelling, right?
It really does.
We're not just breaking down an album here.
It's bigger than that.
We're exploring this intersection of music, celebrity, and societal values.
It's like peeling back the layers of an onion, but there's always another layer underneath.
There is. And speaking of layers, we've only scratched the surface of this deep dive into Chris Brown's 11.01.
I know, right? So much to talk about.
There's still so much to explore. But let's just take a second to gather our thoughts, What are your biggest takeaways so far? Anything you want to delve deeper into?
All right, so we're back for the final part of our deep dive into Chris Brown's 11.11. After all this discussion, It really hits home how much is going on beneath the surface of this album. You know what I mean?
It's true. This whole experience with 11.11, the tour, the controversies, it's like a tapestry, a really complex one,
Oh, that's a good way to put it.
Woven from all these different threads, trying to untangle them all. It's a challenge.
For sure. What really sticks with me is that idea of duality we talked about.
Yeah.
On one hand, you have Chris Brown, the art, incredibly talented, pushing those boundaries, experimenting with different sounds, those electrifying performances. But then there's the weight of his past, those actions that caused, real pain.
Yeah.
It's hard to fully embrace one side without acknowledging the other.
It's a constant tension, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think a lot of us probably feel that when we listen to his music.
I do.
Can we really separate the art from the artist? Is it even possible to enjoy the music while condemning those actions? I don't know. There's no easy answer.
Right.
And that's what makes this whole deep dive so, thought-provoking.
It is.
It forces us to confront some uncomfortable truths.
It does, and it goes beyond just Chris Brown, right?
Yeah.
This is happening across the entire music industry, the entertainment industry.
It is.
How do we hold these artists accountable while still appreciating their creative output? It's a conversation that needs so much nuance, so much empathy.
It does.
And honestly, it's something I'm still trying to figure out myself.
It's a sign of the times, for sure. And it's interesting. Brown himself seems to be aware of this whole duality thing.
In what way?
Remember that last-minute track change on 11.11?
Yeah, where he swapped out double negative for views.
Yeah, the one with Justin Bieber. Apparently there were some legal issues or something.
Oh, right.
But it almost felt symbolic,
What do you mean?
Even in the final hours before the release, there were all these competing forces pulling him in different directions.
Whoa, I hadn't thought about it like that.
That's kind of wild, right?
It is. This constant push and pull between his artistry and his personal life, playing out even in the album's construction.
It makes you wonder how much all those external pressures shaped the final product.
It does.
It's fascinating. That's the thing about art. It's never created in a vacuum, right?
Right.
It comes from the artist's experiences, their influences, the world around them.
And in Brown's case.
Oh, man. In his case, that world is filled with so much, both good and bad.
Adulation and scrutiny.
Exactly. Forgiveness and condemnation is all there, woven into 11.11.
So where does that leave us? What's the takeaway from all of this? Is there even an answer?
Honestly, I don't think they're a simple takeaway.
Oh, okay.
This isn't a deep dive with neat conclusions or easy solutions.
Right.
It's about asking those tough questions, challenging our own assumptions, and just acknowledging how complex everything is, both the art and the artist.
Yeah.
And maybe that's the most valuable lesson here.
You're right. Sometimes those are the most impactful experiences.
They are.
The ones that leave you with more questions than answers.
Exactly. It pushes us to think critically, have meaningful conversations, confront those uncomfortable truths.
And maybe those conversations are what lead to real change.
I think so.
And at the end of the day, it's up to each of us as listeners to decide how we want to engage with all of this.
That's true.
There's no right or wrong answer.
No.
But the act of engaging, of wrestling with these questions, that's what matters.
Couldn't agree more. It's about the journey, not just the destination.
I like that.
And on that note, I think it's time to wrap up this deep dive into Chris Brown's 11.1, and it's been fascinating.
It has.
Challenging and hopefully thought-provoking for everyone listening.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining us on this journey, everyone. And remember, this conversation doesn't end here. Keep thinking, keep questioning, and keep exploring the world around you. We'll see you next time for another deep dive.